unmute. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the PatternFly demo for October 30th, 2018. Let's go ahead and get started. So up first is interaction design, and Matt will kick us off.
We just got that document up to be okay. And I'll share out my screen. Okay. So I've been working on documenting behaviors and design documentation for alerts and notifications. This includes synchronous or inline notifications, toast notifications, which both use the alert component. So this talks about how those alerts are used in context of different types of notifications, different types of situations. We've had a lot of good discussion about accessibility of notifications, and there's some guidance in here on how to write messages for notifications that are accessible for people using screen readers. And then the other thing that is included in here is discussion of the notification drawer. The notification drawer has not been implemented as of yet, so we wanted to get out in front of that design a little bit. This talks about the use of the drawer, what goes in the drawer. This is not really drastically different at all from what's in PatternFly 3 in terms of the behavior and function of the drawer, but and the next steps on this will be to pass this over to visual design for refinements on the notification drawer and get that into implementation. So this has been circulated for review with the UXD leads. I do have some comments that have come back. We'll probably be doing another iteration of this sometime soon, but the link is in the agenda, and I welcome anybody on this call to also take a look at that and let me know if you have any comments. Thank you. Any questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Thank you.
And next up is Stacy. Stacy, are you speaking? Don't think we can hear you.
Could hear Stacy speaking, but her audio doesn't seem to be
Yeah.
coming through.
Okay, let's go to visuals and then we'll come back to Stacy. So visuals, Mary is up.
Hey guys. Let me screen share. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you guys see this and hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and see it.
Okay. So this is pretty quick because it's not something that has much of an interaction to it. It's just a visual element that's for the most part static. So I've been kind of iterating on the PatternFly 4 avatar design. So what we've kind of seen most recently, or in all the mockups so far, has been this circle that contains an image. So the user would upload a photo of themselves, or I guess something else if they really wanted to. And so there's been some iterating on both that, the specifics of that, and the specs of that, as well as in the event of if a user doesn't upload an image. So the biggest change across the board is that we have shrunken the size of the avatar area entirely. So before, I want to say it was a 50 or 51 by 50 or 51 pixel circle here, whereas we've shrunken it down to accommodate, for a little bit less real estate within the masthead area. So we've shrunken it down to 36 by 36 is now the new size of avatars. And we also have come up with a way to kind of this default avatar for when the user doesn't upload an image. So this is what myself, Michael, and Kyle have been chatting about, is kind of this really simplified grayscale silhouette of a kind of cartoony user. So something a little bit with a bit more visual interest than just the font awesome user icon, but something that also doesn't have so much detail that it gets lost at the small scale. So I have this, it's just one slide that I put together. This is in the agenda, and then within here I have a link to the GitHub issue as well if you felt like taking a closer look at this. So I think that's all that I got. Thanks.
Can I ask a quick question about this? So currently we have like for desktop, we have a larger avatar, and then for mobile, we have a smaller one. I'm assuming that it's just going to stay this size regardless of desktop or mobile now?
That's actually a really good question. That isn't something that we've looked at yet. We've just looked at it from the standard desktop scale. So yeah, that's something that we'll have to kind of investigate. I think we just recently, I think yesterday, agreed on this for desktop. So we'll have to continue to look at if we want to have it change. I would imagine that maybe for mobile it might change, but I don't think that at other sizes it would get any smaller, because any smaller than it is now, I did test it out at, I think, at the same height as the bell and cog icons, and it definitely was not hardly visible at all. So my initial instinct would be to say that it probably won't change size, but that's something that we haven't really discussed yet either. So I guess it could go either way.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions on this? All right.
All right. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
And next is Michael.
Okay. So I just have a quick update on where we are with dashboards. It is, I think, still in progress, so any feedback would be awesome. So first, I'll start with just a little bit of review. This is kind of the core of our dashboard system, where we've got this overlay, this top overlay area, and that's where we're kind of thinking all of the graphical content will go, so charts and more graphical representations of data. And then underneath, we've got the kind of white panel area where we're going to have things like tables and list views and things that are more text dense. So just to review again, the dashboard, what we're calling the dashboard area where the charts are going to go, can expand. And then it can even be a full screen experience if needed. And that's kind of where I focused on this kind of next effort of expanding this overlay system or layout system. So we're thinking that we don't want to have more than 3 levels of content areas here, which essentially translates in a visual sense to 3 levels of overlay density. So I was kind of just playing around with, this is an older dashboard kind of design layout that we've got, where we've got just 2 content areas, and you can see there the kind of hierarchy we're building with the overlays. That can also, and then here's an example of how that might expand to 3 content areas, where we've got this second overlay density on top, and that 3rd level is just a pure solid color of the dark, super dark gray, basically black, that we're using. and essentially just playing around with that. So, what happens when we have a right panel that goes over, both of those horizontal divisions? How can we kind of, if you just have a right panel, what does that look like? Again, since we just have two levels of hierarchy here, we don't have that fully solid color. And then here's an example of that flipped. The kind of goal here is to keep things simple, but still be flexible enough to meet a variety of needs. So you can see we're kind of going with this three column approach for the vertical divisions. And that's kind of what that looks like. So we're kind of still playing around with these, and I think this is a really good start. But the next steps are to get some content in here and to actually bring kind of more proof of concepts to the table. You might remember this. I think most people here have seen this. It's an older dashboard mockup, but it's kind of an example of where I want to go with all these other layouts that I just showed. So I want to try all these out and make sure they work with actual real content. And then there's also some simultaneous work that I'm doing with charts where there's some great development work around charts going on, but I need to come up with a few more color schemes. So I'm going to kind of do both of that at the same time, trying out different sets of color for these charts and different types of charts and different sets of data for all these different layouts. And that's it. That's all I got.
Hey, Michael, this is looking great. I just have one comment or one thing to ask you to keep in mind.
Sure.
I think that in the future we will most likely want to support editable dashboards. I don't know when that will, I don't think that will be in PatternFly 4.0, but it is something that is on the table. So be sure to consider with this overlay system, how would that work if somebody is customizing or editing their dashboard or moving cards around in some way, adding
Right.
cards, removing cards.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I think that's something that's going to definitely have a big influence on how these turn out. So I'll definitely be keeping that in mind.
Great.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. And next is Christy.
Hi, everyone. This sprint, I've been working on multi-selects with filter chips, type ahead for selects, and then CSS for filter chips. So everything's kind of intertwined. I'm going to start with multi-select. So this is building off of what Michael had been doing with selects. But basically, we were just trying to explore what happens when we have an overflow of filter chips within a multi-select. So say I've already chosen 2 filter chips or 2 items, and then I go to choose my 3rd item, and the filter chips overflow within its container. So what we're going to do is it's going to wrap to the next line, and this container that it's in is going to expand vertically to fit them all. But then when I'm out of that selection and I click off, it would go to this. So it would go back to its original size container. And then the overflow would be represented by this, where it says 2 more, that's a modified filter chip that would act as a button, and it indicates how many chips have overflown, and then also acts as a show and hide for the overflown filter chips. So if I click on this button here, it would expand out to show me all my filter chips, and then when I click out of it, it would go back to that view. And this is a solution we thought about because we're thinking about scrolling, but with other issues we're dealing with scrolling, I think this is a more suitable approach. And then for type aheads, kind of builds up on this. For the single select, we have this drop down action here. So if I drop down, it shows me all the options I have. And then as soon as I start typing, those options filter down. If I click the option here, New Jersey, it doesn't populate as a filter chip. It just changes what I have selected here. And I have the option to close out of what I've selected. And then if I was to close out and get rid of that, it would go back to the start where I have this drop down option and I can input here. So that's for single select. And then for multi-select, it's basically a combination of the other 2. So I can drop down as soon as I start typing, I add a filter chip, and then I can add a second one here when I type Michigan here. And then as soon as I start typing and it overflows from the width of that container, it's going to expand vertically, and I can type there, and I'll add my 3rd filter chip, and it'll do the exact same thing where we'll have this button where we can toggle to see
more or less of the filter chips. So I'm going to add these designs to what we have on the drive. And then for CSS-wise, I've been working on the filter chips. So these are the individual filter chips. This is when I hover over one, when I'm active or focused on this button and I want to close out of the filter chip, it's going to turn a darker blue, just like that, and it will be removed from the page. Also, this target area for the button is larger than what we have in PatternFly 3, but also is enough to fit inside of the drop-down groups when we have those implemented. This is a truncated filter chip, so if there's too many text, we use ellipses like this. And then this is this modified filter chip that I was speaking about that'll be used to indicate the overflowing filter chips. So hover and then select. And then this is what the filter chips look like in groups. So there's multiple options right now. Say I only have like one category that I'm filtering from. They would be placed on this gray background like this without a label. But if there's multiple categories that I'm filtering from, they would be divided like this. So like I have United States and I have the items that belong to that category, and then I have Mexico and I have the items that belong to that category. This is similar, this third line is similar to what we have in PatternFly 3, where we have the category and the filter. So that is I just put this in here as another approach that these filter chips are quite flexible, and that's still an option. So I just put a PR up for this, but I'm still working on it a little bit. But yeah, feel free to check it out or ask me any questions.
Awesome. Looks great, Christy. Thanks.
No problem.
And we're going to go back up to Stacy now.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so I've been working on design guidelines for forms, which also has extended as I've been writing this stuff into data entry and text entry, and then also contextual help. So I'll just kind of walk through this design documentation. One of the biggest things about this design documentation that we've been aiming for is giving designers the information that they need to make good decisions about what they're using and how they're making their decisions. So I started off with just general information about the different elements of a form, and you can see I have them listed here. Immediately when we started kind of digging into this forms work, it overlaps so much. So with text input and data input, and having all that information in the same place is likely to be very overwhelming. So right now in PatternFly 3, we have the forms components and patterns split up into a lot of different pages. One of the goals with this was to kind of revisit what we were doing with that, kind of group this stuff in a more intuitive way and make sure that as much of the content as the designer needs is living in the same document. So if you're interested in building out a form, you're going to get the main, the main information, the kind of crux of what you need from here. And then as you're kind of digging into the nitty-gritty details, like your data inputs and your field labels and stuff like that, we're going to do a cross-linking strategy where we're going back and forth between those two things. But the idea is to make it really intuitive and easy to find exactly what you need. So we have basic information about the general elements that you find in a form, text fields, data inputs, and then help. And we go into some detail on the help, but then so you have those basic elements, and then the components that are used in forms are going to be slightly different. So you've got the text fields, you have popovers, different data inputs, and buttons. So we just have these broken out, and what we'll do is link to the component information from here. So then usage guidelines, we've got information about progressive disclosure, how to choose the right data input, where we link you over to the text and data input guidelines. The lights just went out in the room that I'm in. And then how to provide the right kind of help. So I think that this is super useful, especially from a content perspective. When you're using field level help, how do you decide whether you should be using field level help or helper text or a syntax hint? What's the difference between those things? And that's all kind of really covered in this section. And then providing validations and errors, what's the difference between a client-side validation and a server-side? How do you decide between which? What does an error look like? And then just a few examples of how you can use forms in your designs. So full page and a modal and a wizard, just kind of covering those things. And then content guidelines. So content guidelines are something that we're trying to include in design guidelines, and it's just teaching you how to write for different kinds of components or scenarios. So this is just kind of thinking about applying the following principles to organizing and crafting the content in your forms. So yeah, just some overview guidance and things to think about as you're writing. And then, yeah, this led kind of naturally into starting to craft the data and text entry. So this is definitely still a work in progress. If you guys have any input on this, I'm definitely interested, but it's really walking through elements of an input, the different input types, how you choose the right type, how you use labels, how you align your labels, how you mark something as required or not required. And then down here, we've got just kind of when do you use these different types of text or data input elements versus like when would you use a select list versus a combo box or whatever the terminology is that we're going to settle on for those things. And then the last piece is contextual help guidelines. So this is design guidelines about how you can include contextual help in your user interfaces. So this is going to be how to organize your content hierarchy. So how do you prioritize the type of content that you want to show users first versus what you hide and show them later? What components can you use to deliver contextual help inside your user interfaces? When do you use a tooltip versus a popover? And then how do you write for these different elements? And I think, yeah, that's it. So if anybody's interested in giving me review comments on these, let me know. These documents are all shared out inside the agenda, and I'm definitely interested in any feedback that you guys have. Yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Stacy. So we'll move over to CSS, and since Christy already showed us filter chips, we'll move over to Matt Carlton.
All right, so real quick, show you the first thing here. We now have within the masthead on scroll, it now condenses. So this is an example of it, which I don't know, may or may not even be working in BlueJeans. But basically, when you scroll, masthead condenses, and that we'll probably have to make those updates, Mary, that you were showing for the avatar. That's why I was asking about it. So that's that. This actually doesn't exist in core as far as like if you were to go look at if you were to look at like the page layout in core, you wouldn't see this simply because we don't have JavaScript hooked up in core to toggle that class. But if you were to go in, if you really wanted to see it and just add it to the header, you would see it working. So that's that. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about quickly was just a slight change that we're going to start doing in the workspace as far as documenting things. So what we've done to date with examples is kind of add all the usage stuff at the very bottom of the page, and it's kind of a pain if you're looking at a specific example and you don't want to have to scroll all the way to the bottom. So what we're doing now is going to just follow actually what Matt Nolting had done in the table component, which is break things out based on the example. So you can see he's got like some accessibility and usage information directly below this first simple table, and then as you go to the next one, you're going to see the same thing. So that's how we're moving forward. Just so you're aware, if you're looking for components, looking at a component, you might start to see this. We do need to go back and change all the existing components, but I think I did notice with Andy, actually, the PR that he has up for tabs has this, so it's kind of already starting to take place. So just wanted to make note of that so people are aware of it. That's it.
Thanks, Matt. And next up is Marley.
All right, can you guys hear me fine?
Yes.
All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Marley, and I work over on the Ansible Tower team. and I'm just going to demo the breadcrumb widget really quickly. So the breadcrumb widget comes in two different flavors. There's a simple breadcrumb and a breadcrumb with a title. This is a preview of a simple breadcrumb. It is essentially an ordered list of links, and the links are styled with this blue text here and this underline on hover. And the very last item of the breadcrumb is not styled because it is like the user's current page, so it shouldn't really be a link to anywhere. In between, we have these dividers. They're added via CSS pseudo elements so that the screen readers don't read it. And below, this is another example of a simple breadcrumb, but the home item is not linked, so you can see it's just a list item with no a tag. And I just made it a little longer so you can see how it wraps. It should wrap the second line like that. And the second flavor of breadcrumb is this breadcrumb with the title. So the last item is now a title, and it is styled just by adding this modifier here, PFM title. And it also has a PFM current to represent that as the current location. And I think that is it. I just want to also give a quick shout out to Matt Noltein and Andres for transferring knowledge and like helping me debug throughout this process. So thank you.
Looks great.
You're welcome.
And next up, we have Andy.
All right, sharing screen. So I've been working on the tabs component, and here we have Michael Zeladuni's mockup here, where you can have a single layer of tabs or second level tabs below that. And these tabs can go inside of cards or on the top of little sections. Oh, sorry, BlueJeans is probably not keeping up with this. On the top of little sections or within cards. And they also need to be able to have flex spacing. So within cards, you don't want to have a gap there, so they need to be able to flex to fill that space. And this PR includes most of that. There are a couple things within future notes we need to consider for the future. I documented that there. And here's implementation. So one kind of interesting thing about tabs, I don't know if I did this correctly, but tabs need to be associated with a kind of section. So I included the HTML for what that would look like here, with the role being tab panel, the ID, and which tab it's labeled by. And I included all of that here with the new documentation that Matt Carlton mentioned. So here's just a single layer of primary tabs with the hover state and the tab 2 section open. If you have a bunch of them, you can surface these scroll buttons to the left and right. And on mobile, we implemented scroll bars, and that was a discussion this morning, deciding what to do there, but for now we're just going to show scroll bars on tabs. And you reveal these buttons by adding classes here, or modifier classes, and that would be controlled via JavaScript whenever necessary. And the idea is when you're over to the right, and there's something more to the right, this scroll button would disappear. And here are secondary tabs. The active item sort of gets placed above the secondary tab list here, so that you can have sort of a break there. The visual separator goes away to make it associated with the secondary tabs below it. And build tabs where it fills the entire section there, rather than being left justified. And that's it for now. And this is kind of preliminary. It doesn't include everything inside this mockup, but feel free to read this and let me know if you have any suggestions or recommendations or questions. Thanks.
Thanks. And lastly, Sarah.
Okay, let me share my screen. Why is it different every time I try to share my screen? It's this one. All right, you see the agenda, hopefully?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have the finite wizard, which is the wizard that has a sort of finite defined number of steps, and just to set expectations, it's still a work in progress and depending on some things that are being worked out. So first off, basically there's a new component that is a finite wizard that has a header area that has the image behind it, and then a title area and a second area that's for the sequence to be put into, and those have differing gradient or not gradient, but background on them to differentiate them. And then there's just an area that whatever content the wizard step needs goes into. So that's the component, and then I actually have it in as a demo to show how it can be put into the modal component to become a modal like it really should be, or one way that it should be. And I'm working on various other examples of it. This one you'll see, so the sequence is still under development and has, Christy's going to be working on that more, so don't look at that too hard. But I'm putting in different kinds of content to show, and I'm going to stop there because it's sort of a mess in development right at the moment. But that's where that stands.
Awesome. Looks great so far. Thanks, Sarah. And next is React, so I will share my screen. Okay, so I worked on the login page. So the login page consists of a few different components. So we have our background image system and a login box, and inside the login box contains a header, body, and footer. So in the login header, we have like text, so log into your account, and underneath there's a drop down. So for this example, it could be used as a language selector, and then some more text, and then a link. And in the middle for the login body will be where the form goes, the login form goes, which will consist of the text input components for username and password. And in the next iteration, there will also be a social icon footer section as well. And we also have on the right side the brand component and content component. And for now, I'll have placeholder text for the example, and underneath that would be the links for the footer. So right now, still currently work in progress, but I should have that PR up soon. And yeah, so this will be reiterated on, and more things will be added for the next version of it. Does anyone have any questions? All right, well, that's it for me. And next is Yoga.
Hello. Let me just share my browser if I can find it. All right, can you see?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this sprint, I added several style system components to React and our other React components because they give users the flexibility to theme their pages outside of just our provided components and layouts in a manner that can be consistent with core styling. And if you move over to the PF core documentation, you can see, for example, that they provide various utilities. They have spacing utilities, flex utilities, display, box shadow, alignment, etc., along with examples of how to use these using these classes. So we wanted something similar on the React side. And to mimic this, we are utilizing the style system third-party library, but we apply our theme to it. So if you look at the code, which lies at the heart of all this, you can see that we have a theme that is mapped to CSS variables from core. So if we look at the theme, we map the breakpoints, radii, font sizes, spacing values, which are used for margins and paddings, for example, all the various colors that exist in core, fonts, font weights, line heights, borders, and shadows. And then we provide a couple more through a constants object that is how the user would tap into the theme, is through this constant. And the constants represent either array values within the seam or key strings. So in addition to what you saw below, we also provide, we also map additional things like the Z index and ratios and stuff like that. So going back to the style system, there are 3 components right now. If I scroll to the bottom, we have a styled box component, which is just basically a generic container that is by default a div element, but through the component prop, you can choose what you want to render it as. And then it has a long list of styling related props. In this case, it has various margin props, padding props, border, colors, dimensions, flex, borders, positional stuff. So there's a lot of props that you can use on this container. And then in addition to styled box, we have styled flex component, which extends the styled box component, but adds a few more flex specific properties. And it also sets the display to flex. And then we have a style text component, which again extends the styled box component, but adds a couple more text specific properties. And if you notice, all of these style specific properties accept either a number, string, or array. And that becomes more clearer as to why if we look at some of these examples. So if I scroll back to the top, if we look at the space examples that I have at the top, if we look at the code here, you can see that the first margin is a value. So this is our constant, space.md, which maps to the array value 2. So in this case, we use a number. You can also use negative margins, either by using our constants or by passing in your own negative number value. You can pass in a string. For the third example, I set the margin to auto. And then lastly, you can pass in an array of values to hit different breakpoints. So depending on the screen width here, and again, it maps to our breakpoints as defined in core. We can apply different spacing values to that. So at the top, we just see an example for how to use different space properties. Looking at some of the other examples, you can set various width properties, either again by passing in a value like 256, which would render this to be 256 pixels, or you can pass in a string like 4m. Here's an example of how to use more of the responsiveness of it. So at the top, I have 4 boxes. And again, for each of these, I pass in an array of values. So depending on which breakpoint we're at, it renders it either as 25% width, or if I reduce the window size, it renders it as 50% or as 100%. And underneath it is another example of how you can change the font size, also depending on which breakpoint you add. And of course, you can do the same thing with the margins and the paddings. This example just shows you how you can make use of the flex properties. You can use, you can set the font size. And again, all of these can be set to font sizes in our theme, which again maps to core. Colors, typographic attributes, font family, alignments, line heights, font weights, font sizes, borders. You can define all of the borders, just partial borders, border radii, border color, box shadows, and positional things like Z index and absolute positioning, etc. Yeah, and that's basically it.
Awesome. Thanks, Yoko.
Yeah, thanks.
And next is Patrick.
Wow, it's really tough to follow. Great job, Joachim. I could definitely use those, I think, in a lot of custom widgets and components, so definitely look forward to that. I worked this sprint on piggybacking on what Matt Carlton showed with the condensed masthead, so I'll show that on the JavaScript side. And I just wanted to call out a few things and also, I guess, pose a question and see if anybody knows the answer. but yeah, we now have the condensed header example underneath the page layout demos in PF React. And then you can view this in full page and you can see the same effect that Matt showed. And I'm actually prototyping this right now in OpenShift. And we've got basically the same thing implemented. I had to do a little bit of customization here because the scrollable content area right now is a little bit different. And I guess Mary, please ignore this avatar right now. We're still kind of working through that, and we have meetings to talk about that more. But I just wanted to show that this is working downstream in the prototype. And then a few things in the code I just wanted to point out. So you can pass the use condensed prop to the page and then the scrolling distance. And I've defaulted that right now to 20 pixels. It looked like that was what was being done in the demo in core that I had seen, but I guess after playing around with it for a little bit, it definitely feels weird if you set it to something more than 20 pixels, like say 100 or 200 or something, because the user is just kind of thrown off. So I kind of liked what I saw in the core example of just doing it like as soon as you start scrolling. So yeah, but you can override it. There's a prop for it. And the last thing I wanted to point out again is just we do not have a solution yet on mobile. And I was going to ask maybe for future if we want to just set it condensed all the time when we use those breakpoints or not. So that's something for future, I guess. That's it for me.
Awesome. Are there any questions for Patrick? All right, and Chitani. Chitani, are you there? Don't think I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. All right. So this iteration I worked on some updates to the drop-down component. A lot of the visual updates are, well, there's only really one visual update that can be shown. So I refactored the drop-down so that it would take in, it would have the use case for basic drop-down. So you could put anything in the drop-down, whereas I guess the more general use case would be used for the drop-down menu. So this was what was implemented before, but under the covers, it's now using a list rather than using divs for the drop-down. So that was changed too. So like in the basic drop-down, you can put whatever you want in the drop-down. So it makes it more flexible for the user. I also removed, in the example, a border on the kebab. Then there's some other changes made kind of under the covers for accessibility. So it's not really something I can show over here. What else? And then I had to make some updates for the PR that went in for trapping the focus in the dropdown because it wasn't working for the basic use case. So I had to make some updates for that. So that's pretty much it. Oh, the props did change though. So now you have to pass in the dropdown items in array so that we can populate the lists so that it can be flexible so we can have the basic dropdown. So if you want to use basic dropdown, you pass it in as children components, but if you want to use make a dropdown a menu list, you need to pass in the dropdown items. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks, Chitani. So that is it for agenda items. Underneath the agenda, we continue to have a list of items that were merged in previously. So if you guys want to check that out, the links are there. I'll be sending out the recording shortly after this. Thank you all for joining and for those who shared today. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.